Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? We're on the road this week, coming to you from Austin, Texas, from the Children's Health Defense 2025 conference. Yep, Children's Health Defense, the super influential organization founded and once led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is now the top health official in the United States. CHD, as they're called, says they're dedicated to ending childhood health epidemics by eliminating toxic exposures. Critics say they're about as, quote, anti-vaccine as it comes, and a leading source of misinformation. Their supporters say they are all about protecting children's health in the midst of a chronic disease epidemic. So I know you're asking, why are we here? And what's this conference really about? What issues are they focusing on? How might that impact all of us? Just a year or two ago, you might not have thought the issues driving this conference would touch your life, but they are. Everything from focusing government health on childhood chronic disease, challenging school vaccine mandates, to ending federal mRNA vaccine research. So is what's being discussed here a harbinger of what's coming next? And are CHD, MAHA, and HHS all the same now? Which brings us to our central question, one you, the listener, should wrestle with yourself. Recognizing profound disagreements over vaccines. Are there any hints here in Austin of common ground? Let's get started. Hey, welcome everyone. We are in Austin, Texas.
Whoa.
Is this reality?
I can't believe it. We left our bedrooms and we
left our comfort zones.
We left our comfort zones and we are in Austin, Texas.
We dodged the flight cancellation list.
That is, well, we don't know that fully yet.
We don't know. We
sure.
could be stuck here.
Yeah, I love Austin. I'm having such a good time here.
Brenda really loves it, you guys.
Seriously, Austin is a fantastic city. Before we dive in, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Brenda Adekari.
Yeah, I'm Tom Johnson.
I'm Maggie Bartlett.
And I'm Dr. Mark.
Yeah, Brenda and I are journalists. Maggie's a virologist from Johns Hopkins. Mark is a physician medical reporter. And as you know, this is a podcast all about the breakdown in trust in public health, medicine, and science.
And guys, we have a couple of really special guests who are here with us. You know them, you love them, you've heard them so many times on the pod. We have Elizabeth Frost and Dr. Craig Spencer.
But we're not on Zoom, guys. You guys are listening in your car, but
we're in person.
Yeah.
But listen, as you guys know, Elizabeth is a friend of the podcast. She is a MAHA Ohio grassroots organizer, formerly the Ohio State Director for the Kennedy campaign. Now she's the co-founder and CEO of Independent Force Consulting. Elizabeth, welcome.
Happy to be here.
And Craig Spencer, he's an ER physician, a Doctors Without Borders veteran, and an associate professor at Brown School of Public Health. Welcome, Craig.
Well, thank you. It was wonderful to see you all in person and snuggle you and give a big hug. So,
well, look, it's really fun to be in person. And as we said at the top, we are here for the annual Children's Health Defense Conference. It's titled Moment of Truth. And I'll tell you, the agenda is chock full of major figures. I mean, you've got Senator Rand Paul, Russell Brand, Cheryl Hines, who's the wife of Secretary Kennedy, Dr. Peter McCullough, Bret Weinstein, Del Bigtree. You've got Suzanne Humphreys, Mary Holland. I mean, the list goes on. I think for those of you who have been in, who've been kind of following public health, following MAHA, these names are going to be very familiar to you. If not, I mean, I'd say, Tom,
These are the biggies. These are the biggies. And we saw people last night lining up to register, and they have their favorites, and they are psyched to be here to see them in person.
To be here.
And it's not even just the guests. I mean, I've been to so many medical conferences. This is right up there. You have a huge registration line. You have a stack of like attendees. You have exhibits. Like this isn't just a little meeting in a conference room. I mean, this is an event. Big signs, easels, rooms, badges, security. And if you flip through the conference program, you get a sense that there's a lot going to be talked about in the medical freedom space. There's the vaccine skeptical space, and the reach is really far and wide. I mean, when I was coming here today, my mind has been in so many different directions on this. I mean, I was seeing patients and then got on a plane to come here. And on the plane, I decided I was going to do a little poll, and I started just blast texting, like all these doctors that I know.
I'm so scared. Who were you texting?
Not you.
Will you release the results?
I will release the results. But no, what I wanted to know is, look, I'm going to this conference. And as physicians, as scientists, like just give me your reaction. I pulled a Tom. Give me like one word. Give me a phrase.
Oh man, I love
And
that.
some of them I got were one word's Godspeed. Okay. But then some of them I was very surprised. I mean, physicians who are out there, he said, I'm all for being open-minded and thinking outside the box. Some of them said, I applaud you for going. You know, you're bridging the gap. You know, I think that people really are interested in learning about how to take care of their communities. I think, Craig, you've said this to me before. Like, what is public health if you don't know the public that you're treating or helping? And I think that is a key reason to be here, no matter where you land on any of these issues. I just want to know, who are you and how can I help you as a public health person?
Yeah, I hear that. And look, I think it's fair to say that we are really interested in this, in what is going to happen here today. We want to give you just kind of a sense of how we're approaching this. This team, our Why Should I Trust You team, by the way, do you know that people call us WISITY? Why Should I Trust You? WISITY. All right. The WISITY team. I don't know if I love it. I have to like try it out a few times.
We have to test market that.
Yeah, we have to like focus group that a little bit. Tell us, write it to questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net if you love it or hate it. But we're gonna fan out, including we're gonna like recruit Craig and Elizabeth as correspondents for WISITY today. Here, I'm liking it. And basically the idea is we just want to talk to people. We want to talk to all kinds of people. We want to talk to people who are in positions of power, influence. We also want to talk to regular people who are here because something moved them to be here. And what was it? What are they hoping to get out of it? So, you know, stick around. Come with us. It's going to be a journey. It's going to be a ride. It may be messy sometimes. We're going to bring you all kinds of guests. We hope you kind of follow the bouncing ball. We'll do the absolute best job of trying to navigate you through this experience. So when we come back, you're going to hear more from the Children's Health Defense Conference. Stick around. All right, guys, so phones off, and we're going to try to keep this nice and short and sweet. Hey, guys, welcome back. We are back with Why Should I Trust You? Like we said, we are walking around trying to talk to all different kinds of people. We just left a panel, and two of the people who spoke on the panel were Drs. Pierre Kory and Dr. Bret Weinstein. And we'd love for you guys to introduce yourselves, and we'd love to get into a little bit of a conversation.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Pierre Kory. I am no longer board certified in 3 specialties, and I now run a private practice telehealth clinic where I see patients in all 50 states, and I specialize in the treatment of post-COVID vaccine injury.
I'm Bret Weinstein. I am an evolutionary biologist specializing on biological trade-offs. I am author or co-author of the book A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, co-host of the DarkHorse Podcast, and all-around thorn in the side of people in power.
I want to start with you, Dr. Weinstein. One of the things I just heard you talk about was blowback. I want to talk to you a little bit about what that phrase means to you, and you even talked about how blowback is costly. Talk to me about your experience with blowback.
Well, so my podcast got taken over by COVID. Essentially, the podcast had a different purpose, and at some point, COVID was very much on people's minds, and Heather, who is also an evolutionary biologist, and my wife, and I were talking every night trying to understand what it was that we were discovering about this new circulating virus, about treatments that were being proposed. And she said, we really need to do this in front of a camera, because lots of people are wondering about these things, and they need to hear what it sounds like when people who have some level of expertise are trying to sort it out. So we started doing that, and it was going spectacularly well. The podcast was growing at an incredible rate, and it began to make real money. YouTube pays very poorly relative to other services, but the number of people who were watching was astronomical and growing at an exponential rate. And then I had Pierre on the podcast, and I had Robert Malone and Steve Kirsch on the podcast.
And this was like around 2021?
This was June 2021.
Okay.
Yeah. And YouTube started to strike the channel, which is a
a process that you go through 3 strikes and they remove you entirely. They demonetized many videos, and they made it clear that if we kept talking about these issues, repurposed drugs and vaccine hazards, that we would not be allowed to remain on the platform. And I believe that would have come to fruition if I had not reached out to Joe Rogan, told him what was going on, and he held an emergency podcast with Pierre and me. And what I believe that did was it stopped them from taking overt action against us beyond what they had already done. But the channel remained demonetized for 4 years, and though they never admitted that they had done this, they capped the number of subscribers. And this is very clear because when they suddenly, without warning, remonetized us a few months ago, the subscribership started to climb again.
So let me understand that. You were saying that you had a platform, you were producing content for that platform, you began to notice that you were effectively being deplatformed. And then Joe Rogan stepped in and said, I'm going to give you guys a place to say your thing.
Yes, and something really weird happened. There must have been a meeting. And in fact, I know from insiders at YouTube that there was a meeting, that it was C-suite level. What I can infer that meeting concluded was that they were going to stop messing with us overtly. And that actually liberated us in one way. It meant that there were things other channels could not talk about that we talked about, and nothing happened. No more warnings, nothing. We remained demonetized. We made zero money, but we could talk about whatever we wanted, but we were frozen in our viewership. There was no increase in the number of people watching. So it was some sort of weird limbo that we found, because the threat, if they had thrown us off YouTube, which was clearly their plan, if they had thrown us off YouTube, Joe Rogan would have activated, and the harm to YouTube would have been that much greater. So I think they decided to mitigate the harm, to limit our reach, that this was the plan, and it remained that way, with no ability to do anything about it, no ability to point out that again and again the things that we had been threatened over discussing had been vindicated by evidence in laboratories, and from clinical work. So anyway, it was a strange thing. We were right in what we were talking about. It was apparently unforgivable to them, and there was clearly a strategy to keep what we were trying to tell the public about from spreading any farther than we could reach.
You told that in upstairs, but not to that level of detail. But you also said something that was interesting to me. You said you're stronger now because of this. How?
It's a slightly different point. I mean, let's put it this way. We can calculate we can't calculate. We can estimate what it is that was lost. The channel was growing exponentially. Clearly that wouldn't have gone on forever, but it was not slowing down. It was an exponential growth curve that just turned into a plateau. So am I stronger in terms of the number of people in the audience? Well, no. The number of people who found us, they found us on other platforms and things.
Like Rumble, Discord, places like that.
Right, but those places are much harder to reach people through. So I assume that our audience is much smaller than it would have been if they hadn't taken action. But the way in which I was describing that you become stronger is every time you're accused of being a horrible person and trafficking in misdis and malinformation or whatever it is they say about you, you lose all of the weak people who surround you. They flee. And that sucks. Many of these people are your friends, they're your colleagues. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You all know better. You know me better than that. You know those slanders aren't right. Why aren't you saying so? But the way you get stronger is that all sorts of other people show up, people who have been similarly slandered, people who are strong and willing to say true things in the face of those vile accusations. And so in the end, you end up, I call it the painful upgrade. Your friend group is just higher quality. They're smarter and more courageous, and those are the people you want around you. And that's the consequence of saying the truth.
I wonder if I can actually ask Dr. Kory and Dr. Spencer here a question, which is, look, I'm I'm hearing the phrase censorship. I'm hearing vile accusation. I'm hearing deplatform. I'm hearing the sense that, and even I want to read a quotation from Sherry Tenpenny up there. Forgive me, I'm just looking at my notes. My glasses are not on my head. I just want y'all to know that. And I'm still going to be reading this out loud. But she said, once you know what you know, you can't unknow it. Which it was like a little light bulb that went off in my head. But here's what I want to kind of discuss. What do you do when you just disagree, right? Like, what do you do when, and here's just a question for both of you. What do you do when you may see the benefit of certain vaccines differently? How do you, I'd love to ask you that first, Dr. Kory, because my sense is there's like the deplatforming and the reaction to you guys, but then there's also an opportunity to actually have a good faith discussion about where you maybe disagree. And I wonder if I can engage both of you on maybe even just some of the things we were just hearing about vaccines and your experience with trying to, I believe, prescribe ivermectin. How do we have a conversation where you just disagree? And that's okay. Or if it's not okay, how do we get to yes, or how do we get to a place where we can at least be in a place where we can try to work through it together, if that makes sense?
I don't think when you say disagree, you bring it up as if it's, I don't know if you're implying this, but you imply it like it's a negative interaction or exchange. I have never felt enmity or criticism for instance, someone who's very supportive of vaccines. I do not have those emotions. So for me, the disagreement is not an emotional one. It's an intellectual one, and I'm fine with it. My issue is it seems that the other side, it becomes an emotional disagreement beyond an intellectual one. And why is it that I don't get emotional? Because I'm very confident. I do not arrive at opinions that I share in public without immense deep study. I will never opine on anything unless I've reached a conclusion through meticulous, strenuous, persistent research. And my opinion on vaccines, this is spent of years, right? And I have an advantage. I have a distinct advantage intellectually against many of the people who disagree with me. And you know what it is? It's not that I'm smarter. It's the lessons I've learned in COVID. A world was exposed to me that I didn't know exist. I see the influences of the pharmaceutical industry far clearer than anyone else. And it's generated my ability to have a deep skepticism and a lack of trust in authorities who state things like the science is settled on this because of this journal article and this journal article. You have to understand where I came from. Had what happened to me in COVID not happened, I would clearly be the person spouting consensus in mainstream because the New England Journal of Medicine said so. I learned to not trust those authorities. I learned a deep skepticism. And every time I exercise that skepticism, I find out that I'm absolutely spot on correct.
You spent COVID in an ER.
I'm an ICU specialist.
You spent COVID in an ER.
I was. And when you talked about your parents, I was thinking about them. You said they lived in Manhattan, right? Mm-hmm. I worked in northern Manhattan during COVID, and in March 2020, and I was sharing with a friend yesterday that I saw more people die per day of COVID than I did while working in Ebola treatment tents in Guinea in 2014. And so when you speak about this, my lived reality was one that I can still not describe the apocalypse that it felt like every day walking into the emergency room. And I remember the jubilation that I had when I got vaccinated December 16th of 2020. I remember what it looked like for many other people. And I remember how the emergency room changed after that. And I'm just curious for you, to your initial point of disagreement, I'm sure there's a lot of things we disagree on, ivermectin, et cetera, but you're an ICU doc. I'm an ER doc. When I call to admit a patient to the ICU, we often disagree on things. Yeah. And so we find a common ground for the patient, right? And so I guess my question for you would be at a time when everyone was rushing in New York City to get vaccinated, when what we were seeing was increasing hospitalizations and what seemed like a clear, distinct difference between people who were vaccinated, who were not. As a doctor that's done this for decades, that's I presume seen the benefits of vaccinations before COVID. What would it take you to trust vaccines again after COVID? Or do you even think that that's possible?
Never. You have to understand, I have 3 daughters. They are fully vaccinated for every childhood vaccine. I was very hesitant on the COVID vaccines for them because they're young and otherwise healthy. I only realized years after it happened that they actually had catastrophic conditions in their teenage years that are heavily linked to vaccines. They had a disease called pandas, which apparently doesn't exist, but it destroyed their lives for years until we got them through it. But I've deeply studied vaccines, the history of vaccines. I have to tell you, almost everything that has been said and written that is accepted in mainstream scientific consensus is a house of cards. It's built on a myth. And the data that they put forth, the data that you trust, that you develop your opinions on, you're not skeptical enough. I've gone into the vaccines. You don't wake up one day an anti-vaxxer. You don't wake up one day saying, I'm going to profess an opinion where I'm going to be attacked for threatening the lives and livelihood and welfare of others, right? You only have that opinion if you believe you're not doing that. I believe that my stance on vaccines is far more in the welfare and benefit of anyone who listens to me than not. And that's where we can disagree. And I can be criticized for that, but I will tell you that's where I'm coming from. It's from deep study. Yeah. This whole polio fraud, this whole smallpox. I mean, if you really look into polio, and let's talk about epidemiologically and scientifically. If you really look into it, the way it's, all of the childhood diseases, right? They started tumbling in the 20th century, all of them, except for polio, suddenly spiked in the 1950s. An anomaly that we should ask questions about, right? And then when you actually look at the transmission dynamics of polio, it started in rural areas. That's interesting. Why is that so anomalous? So why would suddenly farm kids and rural people be getting polio? I'm just going to walk you through this. And I was fascinated to learn all these things that didn't make sense about polio. And rather than going through a whole lecture on it, but for me, after studying polio, it's clearly largely DDT poisoning. That mirrored completely the rollout of DDT, the way they sprayed it, where they sprayed it, the way the definitions changed after the vaccines came out. And the other thing is almost all the vaccines appeared on the scene after mortality was infinitesimally low, yet they're credited with saving millions and millions and millions of lives. And they're constantly misrepresented.
Dr. Kory, I actually want to get Craig's just response to that, and then I'd love to have Mark and Bret also chat further.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, sure, I think it's understandable. We all need to look at the science, and I think we should question, the science. I've said that I'm a skeptic about everything. When I get my kids vaccinated, I make sure I'm doing the right thing, and my kids are vaccinated. But I think there's a difference between, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, like, we can look at the science, but I've also seen with my eyes, right? And so going into the emergency department, treating patients, knowing the difference, it was very clear to me in January and February and March and in April of 2021, who got sick, who got really, really sick, who was getting oxygen, who was on a non-rebreather, who was getting high flow nasal cannula. And it was almost always unvaccinated folks. And I'm sure that there's some. I have
one thing I want to say about
that. But I'm just curious. Yeah. So if I can look at the science, and I think it's fair to say there are things that are hiding underneath there that are not being fully represented. But I'm curious your thought, like, for someone like me that sees this with my eyes, and not even thinking about the science, but seeing what it looks like in my emergency department.
It's almost like that Sherry Tenpenny. When you know what you know, you can't unknow it.
Yeah.
It's almost like he can also feel that, and I'm curious as to how you respond to that.
What if what he was seeing wasn't true? So I'll give you one experience that happened to me. It was November of 21. Vaccines had been raging around the country. Everyone was vaccinated. And one day I admitted a guy to the ICU, and I look at his EPIC record, right, which is an electronic medical record.
Okay.
And I see that he's fully vaccinated. And I was like, that's weird. I've never seen a fully vaccinated guy in an ICU. And I see, he's got 2 vaccines on his chart. And I realize that he got the vaccines in an office that was attached to the hospital. So it was electronically input. And I started to wonder, how are we inputting these vaccines? And I'm just going to fast forward to what I found out. I've talked to nursing administrators all over, been crying foul that this is fraud. But there was a systematic burying of vaccination status. In EPIC, there was only 2 categories of being vaccinated. It was vaccinated or unknown. Do you know what unknown criteria was? Anyone who wasn't that guy. You come in with your vaccine card from CVS, from anywhere, you went into unknown. And it was buried on page 2 of the nursing admission. And this happened all across the country. And then you got to watch the CDC coming out with their fancy little charts, beautiful charts saying that anyone in the hospital was unvaccinated and all the vaccinated people are down here. And I had to watch that over and over again. I knew for a fact that the hospitals were full of vaccinated all over the place. And it was happening in other countries that were more transparent. That's the thing. You're not just like relying on one little set of observations. This was happening in Ireland and the UK. And guess what happened? They stopped releasing the vaccination status of hospitalized patients in a number of countries. Suddenly they did it. And they would even give reasons why. But Brett, you remember the reasons why they stopped doing it? It was like for fear that we would misinterpret the data or something.
Well, a tremendous amount of the fraud was built on the fiction that the important thing, since someone had received the information from on high that the vaccines were safe and effective, obviously the right way to get out of the pandemic was to make sure that everybody got them. And that meant that the only thing that was allowed to be put into public was an indication that these things were good and that people who weren't getting them were in danger, which basically is a license for fiction. Right? Those fictions were understood to be morally good, and that is something that we have to understand. Public health took the right to lie, which it does not have. Public health is an interesting set of questions about things like how a virus spreads through a population and what can be done to reduce that spread. But it does not have the right to mislead us into behaviors that it thinks are right. We have a right to informed consent.
Without, obviously COVID was a jarring experience. I mean, Bret, you write that you were, writing a book, and pre-pandemic, you said there were 3 amazing discoveries that changed the world. And that might not be exactly your language, but it was vaccines, I think it was antibiotics, and was it surgery?
Surgery.
Surgery.
The 3 great medical triumphs.
So these are the 3 great medical triumphs. This is 2020.
Yep.
And your brain, and you are an evolutionary biologist, I mean, you were so solid on that.
Not only that, my children, first of all, I never believed that vaccines were safe. I always knew that that had to be wrong.
You like to say they were with
I thought
less
they were
risk.
tolerably safe and that they were more beneficial than harmful. But in my children's case, though, they are fully vaccinated, as according to the CDC, which I now regret. But we postponed every vaccine that we could postpone with the understanding that the more development you had already been through, the less harm that any of these vaccines could do. So we were aware that there was a risk, but we thought that they were on balance good. I now feel that the risk is not tolerable in any of their cases. And if we can go back to the question of what it would take to change my mind about that, the answer is pretty unfortunate. The answer is I don't trust the academy anymore. I've seen too much. I've seen nonsense portrayed as scientifically valid, and I've seen people slandered and their reputations ruined for raising perfectly natural questions. I've also seen, worst of all, the gaslighting of people who are going down a perfectly valid logical road. Right? Things that are privately discussed in the halls of public health departments, if you said them in public, you were portrayed as a crank. That right does not exist. You do not have the right to gaslight the public over proper logic, and yet that's what's done. So,
do you think that these scientific questions, though, have totally abandoned logic? I mean, Pierre, you said your come to Jesus moment was going through the VAERS database and reading the clinical vignettes, and you said you detected a pattern. But you are an ICU doctor. You are, you have a PhD. You have an MD degree. You got there by keeping anecdotes in the proper framework in your mind, in your books. If we all relied on anecdotes like that, I don't think we would have a functional medical system. I don't think we would have.
I have to correct you on the way
please.
you're representing. The question that I was answering is what was my initial kind of entry into developing an opinion on vaccines. I didn't race to a conclusion because of reading repeated anecdotes about deaths and VAERS. That was the first thing that really stimulated me to ask more questions and look at more data. I probably spent the next year or two looking at immensely varied sources of data, which were all sending the same signal. So I'll give you an example. I was called into a meeting with the top life insurance companies in the country. And it was put together by a life insurance consultant because he was aware of what was happening to the young people in this country. And the life insurance companies, they sent high-level executives. There's 20 people on that Zoom, all cameras off. In fact, there was only one executive who ever spoke, and then there was a regulator of life insurance. And you know what the topic was about? It was about the fact that in 2021, the mortality rates of young people under the age of 45 had risen by 40% compared to 2020. In that business, a 10% year-to-year rise in mortality is a 1 in 200 year event. That business had never seen a 40% rise in any demographic. In the youngest and healthiest, and by the way, these were group life health insurance, and I happen to know a little bit about this because I had to. Group life health insurance, you're talking about Fortune 500 companies largely. These are the whitest of the white collar, the healthiest members of our society, the ones who are not dying of COVID. And they even said, this was like one executive, they knew it wasn't COVID. And it was, we don't know, but there was danger signals going off that no one's ever been able to explain. And all you have to ask yourself is, what happened? And this is third quarter of 2021. What happened in the third quarter of 2021? Well, the mandates. We started vaccinating people who didn't need it, and we did that aggressively and ferociously. I cannot think of any epidemiologic explanation for why that spike was so high then, and then it started to come down. It's still elevated, but there's historically never been anything like that's happened.
You said you don't trust so many data sources. Like, why do you trust that one?
Oh, that one, because you don't want to ever, their whole business is dependent on getting the data right. That is nothing they would ever manipulate. If they did, that would hurt their business. I mean, these are actuarial data. I cannot fathom a reason.
So there's
why
some
I
data that's foolproof.
They wouldn't. There's no incentive to manipulate that data. So I'm really looking where are the incentives, right? So I now know. I used to venerate medical journals, right? If the New England Journal of Medicine said it, the Lancet, the BMJ, then it was truth. I used to venerate the scientists that published there. And after COVID, they revealed themselves to publish utter nonsense with all of the same message. So the article that I talked about in the panel was, you got to look at this article called The Disinformation Playbook. Disinformation tactics were invented in the 1950s by the tobacco industry. And they hired PR firms. And I believe, although I haven't found this, but I actually believe it was probably because Babe Ruth got jaw cancer, because he was one of the biggest salesmen for cigarettes. He was, one of the famous people in America, loved cigarettes, and they were using him. And then jaw started rotting from cancer. They got a PR problem, and they literally put together the tactics. And if you read the tactics, the number one chief tactic is something called the fake. And it literally relies, there's three sub-tactics to it. So number one, conduct studies with predetermined results. They do that repeatedly over and over and over again. I've busted so many fraudulent studies for being designed with predetermined results. It's actually not that hard if you look and dissect them very well. So I've seen so much immense fraud that I didn't know existed. The other two things they do is they repeatedly publish positive results that supports what the message they want society to receive, and they censor those that don't. And I've lived that. That's been my career since COVID.
Dr. Weinstein, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I sure do. I think this is a very important question. And I want to take a different tack. The P in PhD is for philosophy. Okay. This is a degree that is based in an underlying philosophy, the philosophy of science. most people who get the degree never studied the philosophy of science and don't understand why they are violating it. But if you understand how science works, then you know that there's nothing about it that becomes viable because it takes place in a clinical setting, because the data is carefully recorded. That science is a pattern of inquiry that works if you do it right and fails if you don't. Now, I want to point out something. The discussion about the vaccines is never, I wouldn't say never, but almost never properly couched in the observation that there were alternatives that were clearly safe and clearly functional. So we were put into a predicament of take the vaccine or don't, rather than allowing the natural process of medicine to unfold, where doctors discover protocols that would protect you at very low risk, right? So ivermectin being one of them. Now, let's look at, we have these gigantic studies that are trotted out to prove that ivermectin, though many people thought it had promise, turned out not to be functional against COVID. This is nonsense, okay? Those studies were rigged, as Dr. Kory is explaining. Here's a place you don't have it rigged. This is how the science works. Ivermectin works against COVID is a hypothesis, okay? A natural experiment occurred not in hospitals, but in our courts. Now, this is something I know about from reading Dr. Kory's book, The War on Ivermectin. If I remember the data correctly, there were 80 cases in which a patient wanted ivermectin and a hospital forbid it to be administered, and it went to court. I believe I have the numbers correct. Maybe you'll correct me if I don't. In 40 cases, the courts granted the patient the right to ivermectin, and 38 of the 40 patients survived. 2 of them died. In 40 cases, the court denied the right to ivermectin, and 38 of the patients died, and 2 of them lived. Am I correct about that? That is what we call in science a natural experiment. The courts did not know they were running an experiment on ivermectin, but that piece of information is so unlikely to come out that way if ivermectin is ineffective that you can trust it. If the data is accurate, if that report about patients who got ivermectin surviving after the court ruled in their favor, then there's no question ivermectin is not only effective against COVID, it is highly effective against COVID. So why do you and the public not know that? That is the result of a propaganda campaign.
I mean, there's so much to say about ivermectin. We did a whole episode on it. I mean, but you're talking about 80 cases, and the science that has been published is, Kory, tens of thousands of patients across many countries, and the trials are so large that they would just put that 80 that number of 80 just to the side.
Do you understand the difference between random error and systematic error? This is another place where the philosophy of science is the key thing that you have to understand, okay? Large data sets are marvelous at swamping out noise if the study is run in a proper way, but it does not overcome systematic error. And what Pierre is telling you is that when a study is set up to tell you that ivermectin doesn't work, and then it does, it doesn't matter what the number of patients was. That just simply gives the New York Times more reason to crow, but it does not put more information into the study about the drug. If you were to...
So you'd like to revamp, just even the way we do science?
No, I would like us to do science.
Yes. Correct.
Well, so let me, here's what I'm hearing you say. By the way, are you guys okay for time? I'm really enjoying this. This is really good.
I think this is productive. I'm good for time.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Oh, so let me just set you up, okay? Craig Spencer.
You said you'd like us to do science, and I'm curious how you're seeing this moment with, quote, gold standard science. I'm curious
Let's just start this whole thing again because I started laughing and I'm really sorry. Dr. Craig Spencer.
You mentioned you would like to see us do the science. And I'm curious how you're seeing this moment, particularly under Bobby Kennedy at HHS, the tagline of gold standard science with Joe Bhattacharya at the NIH. I've had some folks say that we're not doing evidence-based decision-making, we're doing decision-based evidence-making, where we're coming up with, the HHS or NIH is coming out with a claim, Tylenol, autism, and then trying to backfit the evidence to it. Do you feel like this is a better way? What would you like that science to look like? And do you feel like this administration is doing what you would want?
To be honest with you, I'm watching something very disheartening. I'm watching people that I know personally and that I wholeheartedly believe are well-intentioned, courageous, and tireless. And they are facing a system that is built to prevent them from fixing it. So they have been forced to scale.
You're talking about Bobby Kennedy right now.
I'm talking about Bobby Kennedy, and I'm talking about Jay Bhattacharya, both of whom are personal friends of mine. And I believe they are doing as good a job as they can do in those roles. And what we are discovering is the industrial strength bulwark that was built to prevent anybody who got into those roles from having the proper effect. So I believe they are having a good effect, but it is painful for those of us who know where the bodies are buried to watch these incremental changes in the right direction and to be watching the clock. How long do they have to get this done? And to be able to calculate, you know what? We're going to be better off at the end of this 4 years, but we're not going to be anywhere where we need to be.
It sounds like you're affording them so much grace when you say that.
I know them personally.
But it's not Bobby's fault. It's not Jay's fault. It's the system suddenly.
I think I would characterize the way you kind of contrasted, whatever that you said, evidence-based decision-making versus decision-based evidence-making. How I see it is, by the way, I'm actually demoralized from what I've learned. I'm actually a very transformed physician. I've gone through a really transformational journey. Everything that I trusted I found was being run by literally money, and the power and the guile and the way in which the tough questions or the tough data is being suppressed. Right. So I talked about disinformation. Right. It's tactics designed to counter science that's inconvenient to the interest. So let's go back to the example of Bobby. What I see them doing is they're asking the questions that have never been allowed to be asked before or studied in a rigorous way. So what they're doing is really inconvenient science to those interests. Every time they take a step towards that radioactive questions whose answers threaten massive financial interests, what happens? Media ringing in circles, echoing, just attacking, characterizing them in the most negative way possible. And I actually like what Bret said, but I know it's not going to convince you to say, well, we know him, he's a good man. But I'm going to say that. I know Bobby, I've talked to Bobby. I think he's one of the most deeply studied, very excellent judgment. And the problem with Bobby is he knows too much. He knows how this game is run. He knows how captured the agencies are. And now he's in there. And I got to tell you, those interests are extremely uncomfortable that he's in there because he knows what they're up to. And he's trying to come out strategies to provide the public with the information they need to make evidence-based decisions that's going to protect their welfare. What I know about the catastrophic dangers of these vaccines is like I've said, my daughters were fully vaccinated. If I had a child today, never one of them.
Bret, go ahead.
Well, are we good on time?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing us all say, and I'm wondering where the role of values plays. And here's what I mean when I say that. I sometimes, look, I'm not a science person, okay? I'm just like a regular person. We have this sense that we're these blank slates and, we see science and then we go towards those facts but the truth is we all have values, right? Life has affected us in some way. What I wonder, and I'm going to be very honest here, I know that my values and my culture and how I was raised and growing up in liberal environments and all that has impacted how I view everything. It's very difficult for me to just look at facts and say, like, aside from saying 2 + 2 is 4, I think it would be really hard for us to honestly say that our values and the fact that you were deplatformed, the fact that your license was taken away from you, how does that not impact maybe even how you're viewing data, how you're viewing science? And I mean that truly not like as an honest, because I think that would impact me, you guys.
Again, the answer is in the philosophy of science. Science is a cumbersome process. If you want to get to an answer quickly, science isn't the way. The reason that we have been depending on science, the reason that it has the prominence in our civilization that it does, is that it is the one process that will take whatever it is that you are expecting and tell you that it's wrong. Okay, it's the one process that overcomes it. That's its purpose, is to correct for bias, right? You have a hypothesis. Maybe you love it. It makes predictions. You think, I expect them to be there. You go looking. If you do it right and they're not there, it's going to tell you. That's what science is for, to make sure that your biases don't turn into your conclusions. It is a self-correcting process, and that is why it is so maddening to see it abused.
But it's what you've just described, that science is a self-correcting process. We have several doctors here sitting at this table who actually need to leave this room and go take care of patients and pull out their prescription pads, and we cannot even agree on the facts. And we can't even agree that my science is not biased. You talk about ivermectin and you talked about life insurance and how there's just no way that they would want to mess that up because the bottom line is there. You see these ivermectin businesses that are booming, just people getting prescriptions of ivermectins. Obviously, there's a little bit of a conflict there. You listen upstairs and some of the things are, there's applause when people say there is no safe vaccine. The room erupts in applause. And I'm seeing, are there just going to be two lanes of medicine? Like, how are we going to live in this world?
Well, first of all, let me point out, I don't know how we're going to live in this world, but that's not my fault, and that's not Dr. Kory's fault, right? People messed the system up. They corrupted a system we are all depending on, and now they're asking the question, well, what are we going to do without that system? You can't possibly expect us to live without it. And the answer is, well, I tried to warn them. It's not subtle that we have a problem with p-hacking anywhere where there's money at stake. Of course there would be. How would we not? P-hacking is a process by which you can make false conclusions look true by playing with the data in certain ways. So that was inevitably going to cause us to do tremendous self-harm. It was never safe. And the fact that it leaves us with institutions in which, frankly, there's nobody left in them who even knows how to do the job anymore. We're so many generations into corrupt institutions that everybody is just sort of playing a role. And to the point of doctors and having to go back into the clinic and deal with patients, I hate to say it, but you doctors are haunted by standards of care. Yeah. Okay. It was supposed to be for
haunted or haunted. Empowered.
No, you are not empowered
by a standard.
Yes, for the following reason. Okay, medicine for thousands of years has been a science, which is very dangerous. A doctor obviously has the power to say the wrong thing and for it to result in your death. That's a frightening power. But they also have the power to discover what is true about your condition, your unique predicament when you walk into that clinic. That requires doctors to be able to say, well, what are the symptoms? Here are some things that tend to work for those symptoms. What does the cluster of symptoms imply about the etiology of the disease? If you have a standard of care where a patient walks in to your clinic, your gut tells you it's something over in this quadrant, but the standard of care tells you this is the thing we do for people who have that checklist of symptoms. If you depart from that standard of care, you're putting yourself in danger, even if your gut is right and the action would be in the interest of the patient. And if you stick to it, you're safe, even if you kill them.
That's not. I don't see it that way at all. I think standard of care is a framework and a word that's used in a legal framework.
Exactly.
We do not. Most doctors I know do not practice in that way. We see a standard of care as a set of guidelines that help us shape our treatment plan, but we all practice outside of that when it is in the best interest of the patient using judgment. And if we were all confined to the standard of care, we wouldn't have the outcomes that we have because of just the individual variability in everything.
But this can't be right. I'm sorry. I'll give you.
Well, let's have Bret and then Pierre.
Okay. So let's take the case of ivermectin. The case of ivermectin is one in which it is absolutely clear. Not only was it a very strongly likely to be true hypothesis that ivermectin would work for COVID because COVID is a single-stranded RNA virus, and ivermectin works across single-stranded RNA viruses. But the natural experiment I described where the court showed this, plug into an AI the data I gave you and ask it what the p-value is on that natural experiment. You will find it is essentially impossible that you would get that result from a court.
Well, that's garbage in, garbage out. Quite
It's not
frankly.
garbage. What's the
that?
garbage?
There's you just have a court case and there's 40 people
no.
and there's no
No,
variable. We don't know who
they're
those
identical.
patients are. We don't know.
They're
Let's
identical.
go, Dr. Pierre Kory.
So in that example that Bret brought up, those two groups are identical. You know what makes them identical? All they are 80 people with families who believe that ivermectin will help their loved one. It has nothing to do with the patient.
Right, but that's not
They
science.
all have.
It is science.
It is.
I
So
guess
you have
the
two
question,
comparator
are there
groups.
any
You
other
have-
variability
The
there?
only variability
It
was the
doesn't-
judge. The judge was the only one. So you split up two groups. One got ivermectin, one didn't. 38 survived that got ivermectin. 38 died that
Right.
didn't. So you're telling me statistically that somehow that's not
No, I
anything
mean,
you can
look, I don't
conclude
know the
from?
exact data set on that. Obviously, I don't think we should litigate that here. But the idea that there are 40 charts that show this and 40 charts that show that, you know that that's not how science works.
No. I know specifically that this is how science works. Look, where.
But they're also- we're neglecting to- sorry, let me just say one more
Where
thing.
was Darwinian evolution discovered?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
In the Galapagos.
Okay.
It was
Where?
disco-
I knew that.
I knew that, by the way. I was
I thought
gonna
you
say
said when.
Galapagos,
I
just
thought
so
you said
it's-
when.
I was going to say Galapagos.
Your buzzer didn't
I know my 8th
Hell
grade
yeah.
biology.
But wait a minute.
But here's my point. Okay, what is it that allowed Darwin to come to understand evolution in the Galapagos?
Were there
a
like
bunch-
40 iguanas in one court and 40 iguanas in another court?
No, it was way worse than that. It was a bunch of dissimilar islands, different sizes. There's not two islands in the Galapagos archipelago that are the same, and yet the science works because he did it right.
Would the 80
So-
court cases be an intriguing clue that then gets chased
No,
by
you're not-
experts?
I hate to say it, and I hate to be in professor mode here, but you're
love it.
not understanding the role of the philosophy of science. Science is absolutely incapable of functioning if you violate that basic philosophy, and it works brilliantly in spite of the noise, which is what you're all pointing to. It works perfectly, even with a ton of noise, if you do it right. Now, your confidence goes up with larger data sets, to be sure. Your confidence goes up with greater controls, to be sure. But this is not how we became a smart scientific species. We became a smart scientific species out in the world where weird things like apples falling on heads result in hypothesis formation. We became, frankly, medicine became a science, even though it was dealing with human beings, no two of which have ever been perfectly alike. So the fact that you're so heavily focused on getting the noise out of the study of a pattern, and you're not willing to see that some patterns are so unambiguous that in spite of the noise, you can trust that they really exist and they imply what they imply.
We have to move on from ivermectin, but just one more question.
Yeah.
You said you have to just put the noise away and make things like sometimes it's just obvious. Is it? And I want to hear your honest answer about this. Patients who got better on ivermectin would have gotten better anyway. I don't care what court, the 40 and the 40, like they would have gotten better anyway.
The court experiment
most
says
people
otherwise.
do get better anyway.
So here's, it's kind of hard having this discussion, right? Because I'm the author of a book called The War on Ivermectin.
That's okay.
Which
That's
is
why we love it.
250 pages, right? And I would say it's not only a forensic examination of the system of science and what happened in COVID around that drug, but it's also autobiographical, because it really describes my journey, and I'll use the term awakening, where I suddenly saw things and how they were run and how things were produced. Like I got to see how the sausage is being made, how it lands on the highest impact journals in the world. I did a complete forensic analysis of so here's the thing. Here's what you don't know. There's over 100 trials on ivermectin. The systematic meta-analysis of them show an overwhelming benefit in every outcome, except for, and this is the name of a chapter, the Big Six. And what were the Big Six? They were the big trials done by the academic medical centers, published in and those were the high-quality, rigorous trials. And I was laughing as I picked them apart. You look at the protocol revisions, they are moving goalposts in the middle of the trials over and over, something you're not supposed to do, right? When you start a trial. I mean, the amount of malevolence and chicanery and fraud is so brazen, but yet anytime I talk to an anti-Ivermectin person, they're like, well, the New England Journal said, the JAMA said, and those trials are a joke. And that's kind of what Bret is trying to say. That's not science. It's being manipulated.
I do think it's interesting, and then I want to bring Dr. Craig Spencer in here. What I am hearing you guys say, and all of us perhaps saying, is that agreeing on or being able to trust the data and being able to trust studies and coming up with some sort of a way that we can do that as a society is really important. And it is clear to me that as a group of people, if we trust certain studies and we don't trust other studies, and maybe all we can do is agree on how the studies were even created, and that is there a rubric through which the number of people, what questions they were asked, what the characteristics, like, it feels to me like, is that a place that medical, like, even if you, like, I often feel like the entry point at talking about vaccines or talking about who died from COVID is often like, should the entry point be, can we do like workshop what a good study looks like? Can somebody like Bret Weinstein and somebody like Dr. Mark Abdelmalek come to a table and say, let's design the perfect study?
But perfect study, you don't need.
Let's design a great study.
But we've already done it. This is my point. We have forgotten what we know about how science works. And frankly, we have forgotten what we know about how medicine works. Now, I want to go back to look, if you frankly understood the philosophy of science and you understood how powerful the result that the court produced is, in spite of the fact that no two of the patients were alike, all that has to be true for that study to be valid is there has to be no systematic bias between the two populations. And we know, because different courts ruled on these things, that there wasn't a systematic bias. It's implausible that there would be. So here's the point. If you understood how powerful a piece of evidence that accidental natural experiment is, then you as a doctor would come to the conclusion, I don't care what I'm being told by the CDC, I have to give this patient with severe COVID ivermectin. Then what would have happened to you? What would have happened to you?
Well, it depends on when you're talking about. I mean, there were people who were given ivermectin. There were these trials that they were given.
No, forget the trials.
So when are you talking about? When
in your practice? Let's say in mid-2021. What would have happened to you as a doctor if you had reason to believe that ivermectin was in the interest of your patient, yet the CDC was telling you, don't give it, it doesn't work, it's dangerous? What would have happened to you?
Oh, you would have. I mean, what
lose your
happened to you
license.
guys?
So then this is my point about standard of care.
I don't think all of them lost their license for giving ivermectin.
Very many of them.
You would have risked losing your license. That's good enough for my purposes.
I think that is uncontroversial that many doctors who prescribed ivermectin were completely ripped apart. I mean, we can all agree on that.
So what that means is that some system that is not medical, some system of bureaucrats deciding what the standard of care is placing rules into the system that would cause a doctor not to give their patient a very safe drug that is in their patient's interest, maybe the difference between life and death. That's the system we have. It's not medicine and it's not science.
Can I follow up on exactly that? Because I think it's a good point. You were mentioning about the philosophy of science, and I've heard you talk about how a lot of this data that we just apotheosize in the New England Journal and the Lancet is not perfect, but that's the stuff that we're building standards of care on. And when the question was asked, should we get rid of standards of care? You said yes, but you were shaking your head like absolutely. I'm curious for you, like what that would look like as someone who trained as an ICU doc.
Because I've discovered.
But what would practicing medicine look like for you without those standards of care?
Oh, I actually practice medicine, and I've never been happier as a physician because I am outside the system and I have complete autonomy. I have a fee-based practice, does telehealth. I got no insurance companies barking up me. I got no bosses. I got nobody overseeing me, right? My duty is to my patient, and I can use my best judgment, and I can use any therapy I want. And in the 3.5 years I've been in practice, I actually got to tell you, within months of developing a specialty practice, treating one of the most complex idiosyncratic diseases I've ever come across, which is the chronic COVID-19 vaccine injured, man, I ran out of pills real quick. Like the tools that the system provides. First of all, there's no standard of care, right? First of all, it's not studied. It's all called long COVID. What nobody knows is over 70% of my practice, it's long vax. Everything started after the vaccine, but yet you never hear of long vax in society. And I know that's not true, but I've had to explore myself, without randomized controlled trials, numerous what you guys would call alternative therapies, right? And I found some that were really effective. And it's like gumshoe medicine. I love it. It's like the old school medicine. You do things with judgment and prudence of things that you can assure yourself of relative safety compared to the danger of the disease, and you observe. It's just clinical observations. I feel free. I can only be told what I can do and what I can't do. And that experience also I contrast with, I'm just going back to how controlled the system is. The media and the system is that I've learned how standards of care are produced. They come out of societies that rely on repeatedly manipulated data that's always published with one interest, is to get their drug into the market. If you look at the story of SSRIs, it's one of the saddest things. It's given out like candy everywhere. Statins is even worse. The truth about statins is incredible. They just don't work for what they claim that they work. Every neurologist and cardiologist in this country, any complaint comes in, they're giving someone a statin. It does nothing. And so I see these, that's why it was like a trigger word when you said standard of care. I'm like, I know what standard of care means. It's literally, and so I got to tell you something. So what I learned, I really learned that other things that I learned in COVID was propaganda, right? So propaganda, the best definition of it, it's a story or a message to get you to think or act in a certain way. And if you think of that and you look at society and how it's functioning, especially medicine, I see stories and messages being targeted at the doctors in the most wily, almost subtle, brazen, and manipulated ways. And doctors are literally acting out on these messages that they're getting, but you have to see how those messages get there. They're through the journals. The power of these journals to control what you do is immense, and you don't know it.
Tom wanted to react to that real quick.
Yeah, I just, part of our mission of coming here was to seek out, is there common ground? Half our audience is traditional public health. The other half is MAHA. And, there's obviously profound disagreement even at this table. And I'm sure there's people listening who are going to be thinking, I profoundly disagree, or amen, keep saying it. You said, Bret, that this is not your job to fix where we are. And that's fair and good. But if we push you to say, speak to the people that don't trust you guys, they're sort of out of power. You guys, this group is ascending in power. What could you say to them that would be sort of an olive branch that you could say to traditional public health, traditional medicine, maybe this is a place that we could focus on and start to find some sort of agreement rather than just this seesaw of whoever's in power is going to be running science a certain way and the other group's going to get in power and they're going to run science a different way.
Yeah, again, going back to the beginning, what I'm trying to, so I've been an educator my entire career. In fact, before COVID, I was actually quite well known in my specialty. I was a pioneer in point-of-care ultrasound. I created courses. I went around the country traveling and building courses. They were 3-day courses. They were immensely exhausting. And I did that while being a full-time ICU doctor and pulmonologist. And so I worked incredibly. I wrote textbooks, and everything that I taught was so well received. I was really very much admired and respected. And I always was inspired by teaching, sharing the knowledge that I've gained and delivering it to others to help them. So what I would ask, because you said about an olive branch, I just want to maybe recast myself. I don't mean harm. I'm literally here because I think I possess knowledge and insight that I think will help you. And so if it comes across as arguing, no, you're wrong, if I've come across that way, I wish I could learn how to do that better, because I don't want to come, because here's another thing. This is a little bit philosophical. What I've understood with these discussions is that you can't win a difference in a belief system with data. So as soon as you start having data,
fucking men.
Yeah,
I just need to amen that because that is what we have learned through this process.
Yeah, so I come with my data. You guys come with your data. I'm telling you that your data is not good, and you're telling me my data is contradicted by all of your data, and then we go around and around. And so I think the bigger sort of where I'm trying to get to, actually, as nice as I can, is not saying I'm right and you're wrong. I'm asking you, begging you to ask more questions of how that data is being compiled and presented. Because I'm telling you, when you look, like I used the term before, how the sausage is being made, it is absolutely shocking, transformative, and it is why I'm a refugee from that system. I will never put on a white coat again. Bret.
I'm going to say another version of what Pierre has just said, because people need to understand how we ended up where we are. In my case, I'm lucky because in 2020, I did embrace vaccines in print. You can see where I was in 2020, and you can ask how I got to where I am in 2025. And it is that journey that ought to be the olive branch, the reach across the aisle. The fact is, we have a corrupt system, and we have a corrupt system because science is a beautiful process, a very powerful process, but it is also a very delicate process. It does not work if you embed it in a market. Market forces are way too strong to allow it to happen. So my experience in science, not just related to COVID, but every time I have ventured into the literature, it becomes corrupted the closer you get to something where there's a tremendous amount of money at stake. So that pattern ought to tell you something, because there's nowhere that there's more money at stake than human health. The fact is, the science surrounding human health is completely unreliable because so much money changes hands based on what's in it. Yeah. Once you know that, there shouldn't be multiple teams. We're all on the same team. Some of us are just awake to that corruption, and some of us are not yet awake. And I would say to all of the people who are not yet awake, brace yourself and go check. Because what you will find is that the system is not attempting to make you healthier. You can debate why that might be, but the basic answer is because it has a higher priority, and that higher priority has to do with the well-being of those who are driving the research with their dollars.
Bret, you're talking about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Are you telling us not to trust the medical system that we live in right now, Bret?
Yes, and I'm telling you that the way, I don't want to say it's not my responsibility to build the system back up. My point is, I didn't cause this. I tried to stop it. It didn't work. Now that we know how corrupt the system is, and many of us have realized just how corrupt it is, the answer to what to do to fix it is not complex. Mm-hmm. We know how to do science. Frankly, we know how to do medicine. We just have to rid the system of that corruption, and we need to build a firewall so that those people who want you to need a drug and want you to use their drug don't have any influence whatsoever on what your doctor thinks is wrong with you.
Bret, you said something in the meeting, and I know we're running short on time, but you said something in the meeting that...
Just say it again in the conference.
You said something in the conference about mandates, and we did a whole episode recently on mandates and how everybody should have a choice. Let's not get too much into that because I think it's pretty clear the positions. You went a step further. You said that contagious vaccines, and I'm assuming you're talking about mRNA vaccines, are going to rob us of the ability to say no to being what?
Vaccinated.
Being vaccinated.
So even if I choose not to get a vaccine, you're saying that what is circulating among us with the mRNA technology? I need you to explain it, basically.
Okay.
Tell me what you mean by all of that.
This is straightforward. Let's take the most basic case. The original vaccines were attenuated viruses. In fact, the story on which the whole logic of vaccines is based on the fact that milkmaids who got cowpox were not apparently susceptible to smallpox. So cowpox is effectively an attenuated smallpox. And it is very easy to imagine a vaccine that transmits in a virus-like fashion that creates an immunity, at least in theory, by spreading through the population. Okay. Many of these technologies that we're experimenting with, they're sort of a ladder building towards that. We have mRNA technology, which turns your cells into a antigen factory to basically create a vaccine inside of you. We now have self-replicating vaccines that actually build more replicons inside your system. We're now talking about building basically artificial nanoviro capsules. So one can foresee that what we are building towards are vaccines that spread themselves. And one can tell from everything that was said during COVID that at some point, public health is going to decide you don't have a right to say no to that vaccine. It's not just that we're going to take your job and your livelihood. You don't have a right to say no, we're vaccinating you whether you like it or not. And the obvious way for it to do that is with a contagious vaccine. Now, here's the problem. In 1947, the Allies hanged 7 doctors for violating patient-informed consent. We agreed in 1947 in the Western world that violating informed consent was a hanging offense. Somehow, between 1947 and 2025, we have forgotten that. We now treat violations of informed consent as if it's something to be debated. And, when some room full of people decides you don't have a right to refuse their vaccine, then you don't have that right. I don't know where the idea that that's intolerable went, but I know that we need to revive it. I have a right to say, I don't believe that that vaccine is safe, and whether or not I do, you don't have the right to force it on me. And the fact that you may technologically have a mechanism for overriding my refusal of that vaccine is immaterial. It is immoral to deploy such a thing.
Remember when we said this was going to be 15 minutes?
I do recall that.
I hope we haven't gotten you guys in trouble. I think you're supposed to be different places. I want you to know how much this means to me.
Thank you.
I hope you know what we're trying to do here. I hope you come back. I mean, I don't know, come back to this hotel room. I hope we talk again. What we're trying to build here is, let's work through this. Yeah. I don't often know what the this is. Maybe there's things we can't work through, truly. One thing we've realized in our show, there are polls out there about MAHA right now. I'm sure, you guys are super educated about this stuff, so I'm sure you know, but 55% of this country is MAHA curious. 15 to 20% of this country is MAHA like hardcore.
Yeah.
Right? So but I will also tell you, the vaccines issue, I'm just going with the polls, okay?
Yeah.
Is not a popular one right now for the majority of the country, including 66% of MAGA Republicans are in favor of school vaccine requirements, are very nervous about the perception that vaccines are going to be taken away. We know where people stand on it. What I do want to tell you is the issue that brings people together in a big way. I just want to leave you with this data is on food and environmental toxins. Yeah. It is the thing that I'm going to tell you right now. It will make Bobby Kennedy president of this country if he focuses on those things, because it is a massive issue that people, Republicans and Democrats together, and I'm going to tell you this as somebody who's voted Democrat, I am frankly wildly disappointed in the Democratic Party for not seizing on the issues of food and environmental exposures. Yeah. And Bobby Kennedy is doing it. But I'm just here to tell you, just honestly, vulnerably, with all my heart, the vaccine issue is keeping a lot of people out of the tent. And I'm not here to tell you what to do or what to say, but just sit with that, reflect with that, and know that there is an opportunity to make this like the movement Del Bigtree was talking about, the momentum, it's not on vaccines. It's on food and it's on environmental exposure. It doesn't mean don't do your thing. You do your thing. You're at CHD, whatever. But I'm talking about that movement, that national movement. I just want to say that polls are showing that.
Can I know that was a beautiful closing soliloquy.
And Bret Weinstein gets the last word, and he's going to bring it back to vaccines.
Hopefully I'm speaking on behalf of the table, because frankly, this has been an excellent discussion. And what I do believe clearly happened here is that you have very distinct sets of views, but I feel like everybody was heard at the table and feels that. So I think this is the kind of discussion we need to have. With respect to your point about vaccines not being the galvanizing issue, it's a divisive issue. The problem is it is not one in which there is moral flexibility. Once you see the hazard and you understand that perfectly innocent people whose informed consent is only exercised through their parents and their pediatricians, and you know that those people, some of them are going to end up gravely injured by the technology in those vaccines, even though it would, yes, be politically much wiser to focus on the stuff that nobody disagrees with. You want clean air, you want food that's safe to eat. All of that stuff is politically right, but it does not. I don't know how I would sleep at night if I didn't tell people
it
what I have.
It doesn't sit right with you in your heart. Like, it doesn't sit right with you as a...
He's saying it's just, you can't compromise.
It's morally wrong not to be courageous about this.
Agreed.
And I've paid a huge price. Pierre's paid a huge price. We're going to continue to pay that price because at some level, how do I look somebody in the eye who was injured by a vaccine that their parents didn't know was dangerous because Pierre and I were playing politics?
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to... Will you talk to us again?
Sure. This is a great discussion, and I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate talking to you guys. Yeah.
Thank you for doing
Well,
this.
And the other thing about all of this is that even though we just said everything about the medical system is broken, there is still something fundamental about the humanity of medicine and how the vast majority of people, even operating in the medical system that you've described, still trust their doctors. And that's a path forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I think that was a really nice note to end on. Dr. Pierre Kory, Dr. Bret Weinstein, thank you so much for joining us on Why Should I Trust You?
Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.